is Margaret, and welcome to my wonderful Knitting Life podcast, vlog, YouTube channel. I am a knitter, a crocheter, a sewist, a weaver, and in my workday, I am a teacher. And at the moment, you find me at our family cottage in Eastern Ontario. And very shortly, I will have to travel back to the subarctic of Quebec on the St. Lawrence shore where I teach. In order to get started, I thought I would show something that my mother gave me for Christmas a few years ago. She's passed now, but a few years for Christmas, she gave me this. And this little item is where my knitting journey began when I was about 5 years old, and I was spending the summer with my grandmother in Liverpool, near Liverpool, in a place called St. Helens in England. And I really wanted to learn how to knit. And my mother just didn't have the time. Mothers are always busy, as I now know. And my grandmother gave me some scraps of yarn and a plastic pair, if I remember correctly, of knitting needles. And I started to make this scarf for my grandmother's dog, Tosco. And I'm not exactly sure which side I started with, if I started with the large end or the small end, but I had really forgotten about this piece until it turned up under the Christmas tree about 8 years ago, and now I have it hanging in my bedroom at our family cottage. And I don't know, it's a bit of history for me with my knitting journey. So I guess I'll start with what I'm wearing. This is, let me take a look at my notes here. This is the Simple Stripe sweater by Suvi Knits. I found it on Ravelry. And it is a paid-for pattern. I made it with Koigu yarn, and I bought what's called a pencil box. And I had learned about this pattern from a person called Leslie Friend. She has the podcast, A Friend to Knit With, and she turned up in her version of the sweater, and I knew I had to knit it. It was absolutely gorgeous. She had used a set of minis from 𝐂𝐿𝐄𝐑, and I believe 𝐂𝐿𝐄𝐑 still sells them, but I'm in Canada, and sometimes when we order from other countries or the United States, we do get dinged with a lot of taxes when things come across the border. And it hasn't happened that often to me, really only once, where I was really disappointed that I got hit really hard when I imported some yarn from England. But I decided to try something of my own style, and there was a sale at a yarn store called the Knitting Loft, which is in Toronto, Ontario. And they had these Koigu pencil boxes on, I think it was 20% off at the time, and I bought them. And I started this sweater, and it's a top-down sweater. And I'll stand up so you can take a better look. It's a top-down sweater. It is full length, but I have a bad habit of pushing them up, so they end up kind of being 3/4 by the time I'm finished with them. The hems are a turnover hem where you simply knit a purl row and then keep knitting and have a tucked under hem, and the same thing at the bottom. And I really like that because I find it gives a lot of drape. And when I was younger and knitting lots of sweaters, it was really commonplace to go down a needle size and do ribbing that hugged you at the hips, but kind of made like a bubble on your body. And that was just the thing that we all did, and we didn't know any better at the time. But this sweater has a lot of drape, and the colors are just fantastic. I often call this my happy sweater because it has so many joyful colors in it. And everywhere I go, my students, my friends, they all stop and ask me about it. It was so much fun to choose the colors of what was going to come next. And I found it a really fast knit because every evening I would want to get another color done. So I think it was definitely under a month that it took me to knit this sweater. And I work full time, so that's a pretty fast sweater for me. It is fingering weight, but it just seemed to go really, really fast. I think I'll knit it again. I have to say that it's definitely one that I will probably knit again. My current whips, because I'm at the family cottage and not in my house where I work, which is where most of my knitting is, I only have one current whip, and it is a project that I'm actually doing as a very small make-along with two of my friends. We sort of hatched a plan to knit the same project just for fun. We would all cast on New Year's Day, and our goal was to finish it by the next New Year's Day, when we would choose another group project. But with one of my friend's daughters getting COVID, with all of the terrible weather and storms that we had this year, we weren't actually able to get together for a cast-on official party. But we did it with our little chat group, and it worked out fantastic. We're all really enjoying the camaraderie of this project. So this project is called the Botanic Shawl, and it is by Stephen West. It's a paid-for pattern on Ravelry, and there are absolute fantastic tutorials online, especially for the cast-on, which I have to say, I'm not even sure what happened. I followed the video, I did everything he said, and then all of a sudden I had the beginnings of a shawl. And I'm not really sure exactly how it all worked, because it was not complicated when I followed the video, but I haven't knit a lot of shawls. So for this type of sort of an I-cord, I would call it, it really just came together so well and so quickly. I'm going to see if I can get that to show up okay. So I would highly recommend, if you do knit this project, that you use the tutorial to get started. Once this project gets going, it's not a difficult project. For anybody who is maybe an experienced beginner, this probably would be a piece of cake. Once you get going, there's repeats that happen right across the project. I found that by the time I was on about the 5th repeat, sorry, it's curling a little bit because I haven't blocked it yet. But once you get past about the 5th repeat, I found that it was very easy to memorize. So once I had it memorized, it went really, really quickly, and I had no difficulty at all continuing that. And these repeats continue, if you're making the large version of his shawl, to 18 of these sections, these section repeats. And then there's a really interesting section at the very end, and you can go and see his video to find out more about that. But it is all knit, because you're sliding the project along the needles to the other side, so that you're never actually doing any purl rows, which is really fun. And it just looks spectacular. Excuse me. Without a whole lot of effort. So the yarn I'm using for the stripe, or maybe what you would call the main color, is Holst Supersoft in the ecru colorway. And I've worked with Supersoft quite a bit, and I have to admit that I also have an awful lot of it in my stash. So I'll be using a lot of it in the future as well. It's a very economical yarn, but it also is a very nice quality of rustic yarn. And I ordered that directly from the company, and I find that it comes pretty quickly, and there's just so many colors to choose from. It's just a fantastic yarn. Now, the changing yarn, that is the Zauberball 100. And again, I ordered that from the Knitting Loft in Toronto, Canada. So here's the label. And the colorway I have is called Comfort Zone, but it's spelled with a K. And it's a 100-gram ball. And on the back here, on the tag, at the top of the tag, it shows the gradient of the color. And from what I understand, that that one ball will get me through maybe not the largest size of the shawl, but definitely a good size shawl. I am now on the 13th repeat, just starting it. And I have a lot of it left. So this is the Zauberball. So it started with that beautiful purple and then went into a gray, turning into a green. And now I'm into this wonderful neon green. And you can see where it peeks through. You can kind of see right there, you know, that it's going to go back to that gray and into the beautiful purple. And I am definitely a purple fan. I love green. So this has been a really good choice for me. But you never really know how it's going to turn out. It's always a surprise the way the colors are going to slowly evolve. And I do have another one of those. I wasn't sure which one I was going to choose to start with, and I just might make this shawl twice because I've really enjoyed it. So this is the other colorway that I have. So again, I do like purple, and that's a very dark purple right there, but you can see that it has lighter purple that's peeking through. And on the other side, you can get an idea that we've got the dark purple, the medium purple, and a lighter pinkish purple that comes through. And then I imagine it'll go back to the darker color. So I might use that for another one of these shawls. But when I read a lot of the project pages on Ravelry, there were some people who had only done every other repeat. So they were getting a much more scarf-like shawl. And I think I'd like to try that. Where I live up north, it is very cold. We use shawls all the time, cowls, sometimes a shawl and a cowl. So I definitely would use everything that I would make. So that might be a future project for me. I'll have to see where that heads. But it is a fantastic project. I'd highly recommend it. And it's well written, but the tutorials are also fantastic. All right. So I do have a couple of things that I have finished that I'd like to show you. The first one is Dana by Marie Wallin. And I believe that that pattern was originally the Brassé. And then when she made her new book, Cherish, she remade all of her colors in her designs and sometimes updated them to a newer shape. And she has her own yarn called British Breeds, and I did order her kit for this online, and the yarn is absolutely gorgeous. One of the softest, silkiest, rustic yarns that I've ever used, and it has an absolute fantastic smell. If you like the smell of rustic yarn, this is definitely the one for you. And from what I understand, it's because one of the sheep breeds that's in this mix for her British Breeds yarn is warbles, and that is the odor that it creates. And when you wash it, it doesn't go away, but it's a wonderful smell. And it's not a smell that anybody's going to smell that's near you, but if you put it up to your face, you'll smell it, and it's really wonderful. Anyway, this was a bit of a journey because I had knit another one of her garments, the 𝐖𝐍𝐈𝐓, that's what it was called, before I knit this one. And I had really struggled with the sizing. I usually knit a large. There are times where I like more positive ease, so I go to an extra large size. So I started with the 𝐖𝐍𝐈𝐓 with a large. And I knit the body and it seemed to be going okay. But then when I got, and it's a bottom-up sweater, but then when I got the body and the sleeves made, and I put everything onto my circular knitting needles, and I started, you know, just getting really excited and going up through the yoke, I started to notice that it was absolutely huge. And I tried it on and I kept trying to imagine, how is this going to decrease enough that it's going to fit me? And I really got 3/4 of the way up the yoke, and I knew that this was not going to work for me at all. It just wasn't going to work. So I ripped it out and I took a look at other patterns that were similar yoked sweaters, and it seemed like there were at least 150 stitches too many at the beginning of the yoke, where you put everything on the one circular. So I hemmed and I hawed and I put it aside, and I had already bought the Dana kit, and I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give this a break. I'm going to start the Dana, but I'm going to not knit it bottom up. I reworked it in my head to write it, to knit it top down. And that way I would have a really good sense of, was it fitting me? Was it getting too big towards the separation for the sleeves? And that's exactly what I did. And looking at all of the other patterns that were common styles, fingering weight yarn, because this is a fingering weight sweater, it looked like I needed to knit the small. And that's what I did. I've never knit a small. I'm not a small size, but I knit the small and it worked. Maybe it was a gauge problem. I'm not really sure, because my gauge did seem to be okay on the 𝐖𝐍𝐈𝐓, but this one turned out absolutely wonderful. I love it. Absolutely love this sweater. So this is the small size that I knit. It does have a few fluffs on it because I've worn it a couple times and I haven't gleaned it, but I find it's absolutely gorgeous. The colors that she chooses she has such talent. I'm always amazed by the talent that Marie Wallin has in putting her colors together. Since I knit the small, I had a lot of extra yarn. So I made it quite long. Some people might call it more of a tunic sweater. I'm very tall. I'm 5'8", and anything cropped, it does not look good on me. So I made this quite long, using up pretty much all of the yarn that I had. And then I came to the ribbing, and the pattern that was originally bottom up said to go down a size, do the 1x1 ribbing. So I did that. I had tried it on before the ribbing and I felt like it looked really good. And then I did this ribbing and it cinched in and it poofed out, and I just didn't like it. So I put it aside for a couple of weeks because the ribbing had taken me quite a lot of time. So I needed to hibernate it, give it a little break, work on something else in the meantime. And then I started thinking about, what am I going to do with this to make it look the way I want it to look? So I decided to try the ribbing again with the same size of needle that the sweater is knit with. And it worked out really, really well. But what I also did, because it is long, just to give it a little bit more drape and movement, is I did a bit of a split hem. And the back is just slightly longer than the front. If I was to do this again on this pattern, because I made it so long, I probably would split further up, and it would just give it that movement and drape that I really enjoy. And the other thing that I'm really thinking about for future sweater patterns, because I do like a slight A-line. You know, the older you get, for me anyway, the less I really want something to hug my body. I want more of a drape. I'm really thinking in future sweaters, I'm going to along just, you know, down under the arm, just gradually put a couple of increases in, not many, but just a couple here and there so that I get a little bit more of an A-line. And I think I'll be happier with that. That's one of the things I think I want to try in the future with sweaters, like this one and like the one I'm wearing, just to get that slight movement to the sweater. So I do have a couple of other things here that are finished that I thought I would talk about. So this sweater is well loved, well worn. A little bit wrinkled, unfortunately. It's been sitting in the cupboard. This is Winterfeld or Winterfeld by 𝐂𝐑𝐑. And 𝐂𝐑𝐑 has a podcast as well, which is really a fun one to watch. But I first saw this sweater on Knits and Pieces. That is another knitting podcast. And there's two ladies that present that one, Kelly and Noelle. And Noelle, I believe, had been the one who had made this, and she made it in Holst. And I believe she did it in exactly the same colors to the colors I have, except where I have this tealy blue, she did a purple, which is called Damask. And this is Holst Garn in the Supersoft, and mine's exactly the same. It's Holst Garn. It's a fingering weight sweater, so it's got really small stitches, but the detail is really wonderful. And the Supersoft is a really interesting yarn the first time you work with it. It's really fine. It looks like a light fingering, and the first time I saw it, I had ordered from the store, directly from the store, and I had these great big cones, and I took a little bit off, and I looked at it, and I felt it, and it was so fine and so crunchy. I kind of thought, uh-oh, what have I done? I don't think I'm going to be using this yarn. I'm really not sure that I like it. But Noelle, on the Knits and Pieces podcast, kept saying that you'll wash it, the spinning oil will come out of it, it will bloom, it will feel really soft. So I decided to make a swatch and wash it and really see for myself what happened with it. And she was right. Every time this gets washed, it gets softer and it blooms more. And when I say wash, I mean eucalyptus, soak, very carefully swished around, no big agitation, because it is 100% wool. It's very rustic, so you have to be careful when you wash it and give it some love so it ends up being what you want it to be. But this is one that I wear all the time. It's surprisingly lightweight. It doesn't feel like there's much there at all, but it's really warm. Now, knitting with the fingering weight takes a lot of time. Definitely more than DK or worsted. So it's not for everybody, but I find the lightweight, it feels like it really breathes. I really enjoy this weight of yarn. So I have one more finished object. And these are sweaters that I've knit over the past 18 months or so, I would say. So my next sweater is called the Forest Star Jacket by 𝐊𝐍𝐈𝐓𝐓𝐈𝐍𝐆. And again, this is knit in Holst Supersoft. And I did buy her book. She has a book that's in English called I think it's called My Best Knitting Treasures, or something like that. But if you look her up, 𝐊𝐍𝐈𝐓𝐓𝐈𝐍𝐆, you'll see that she has a store and you can order her book from her store. You can also order yarn kits, and I do have a couple of those, I have to admit. And her yarn is out. The yarn that she uses is 𝐊𝐍𝐈𝐓𝐓𝐈𝐍𝐵, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But for this sweater, I'll show you the back because I haven't buttoned it up. I just used the Holst yarn that I have, and the main color is a really, really natural, rustic looking color. It's called Truffle, but it did make a really nice background for all of the different colors that I brought into this. So it's actually a cardigan, not a sweater. I should clarify that. I'm just going to do up a couple of buttons. And it does involve some crochet as well. So it's got a motif. I used pinks, purples, cream, and then towards the bottom, brown and a goldy orange. And this is the inside of the sweater. So you can see the floats, the nasty part, but it turned out okay. It's pretty tidy. But I found with her patterns, it was a huge learning curve. For starters, it was the first sweater I ever steeked. I'd never done that before, so that was pretty scary. But I survived, and now I realize it's not that hard, and I shouldn't avoid patterns with steeking when I love them, because it really isn't that difficult, especially if you're using rustic yarn. And the whole Supersoft is rustic, so when you cut those steeks, which would have been at the front where the cardigan is, and for those of you who don't know what a steek is, it's when you knit a sweater in the round, and that way you're doing your color work with knitting all the time rather than purling, which is a much faster method, especially if you're continental or if you're knitting with two hands, which is something that I've learned to do in the last year. And it's a game changer. It's amazing how much faster it goes. I just like the rhythm of using two hands. It feels really nice. But there's some really interesting things about this sweater that I learned. So when you do the extra stitches, when you're knitting it in the round, and you have some knitters do 5, some do up to 9, that's what's going to get cut. But because you're cutting this way down the sweater, it doesn't really unravel on you. It just stays in place. And I took this to my sewing machine, and I just quickly ran my sewing machine up that raw edge to lock it into place. But what 𝐊𝐶𝐈 has you do is knit an interfacing, kind of like sewing would. You know, when you want a French seam, I think it's called, where you would cover up your seam. So you knit this interfacing and then sew it down. So your raw edges are all hidden in this pocket. It was the first time I'd ever seen a pattern do that. And then on the edge, you pick up and you crochet the button band. And not only that, she really loves to embellish her patterns. You also do crochet here with a decorative stitch in, I've got 2 colors here, the pale pink and the dark purple. And then you also go along the very edge. At the bottom again, there's also that interfacing and the decorative color at the very edge. And at the top on the neck, again, there is that crocheted collar with the decorative edges in crochet. And the crochet is not difficult. I mean, you can, they're basic stitches. They're not They're not a challenge, but this has been such a learning curve, but a fun learning curve, not so difficult that it's a task that's overwhelming. Another thing that she does that I'd never seen before is she puts a faux seam in the sides of her sweaters. And now that I know about this, I see other designers do that. So I'll just hold it up so you can see. So I knit this in the round. It's not knit in pieces, but there's a purl stitch all the way. And that helps when you're adding stitches, decreasing stitches, because of course, when you're doing color work, the pattern won't make sense if you're doing it continuously, but you're adding and subtracting. So that purl all the way up the side breaks the pattern as if you had done your sweater in pieces and sewn them together. So it's a sneaky little way of making the garment make sense. So I would highly recommend checking 𝐊𝐍𝐈𝐓𝐓𝐈𝐍𝐆 out. Her patterns are just beautiful. And she does have some more simple patterns as well that would be more beginner friendly. But I didn't find them overwhelmingly difficult. Maybe just not the kind of pattern that you could do while you're watching a movie and you want to see all the parts. That might not work. All right. So acquisitions are a bit of a no-no for me this year because I have an enormous amount of yarn already. My stash flows over all the bins that I have, and it's rather an embarrassing problem. So I'm really trying to use up what I have and put a good dent in it this year. But I did purchase something before the holidays that is going to be on my to-do list for 2023. And it's a kit. So this is a design that I've been interested in making. Sorry for the crackling. That I've been interested in making for quite some time. It's called the Positive Vibration Shawl. And I think it's pretty popular. It's been around for a while, but it is a pattern that uses short rows to do all this amazing work with a yarn that is colored against a yarn that is one solid color. So I picked this up from Mary Maxim, actually. They had a massive sale on these kits, and I actually picked up two, but don't tell my family. They'll get mad at me for buying more yarn if I admit that. So this one is the one with the sort of the greenish color as the main, and then the two colored yarns that will go with it. And these yarns, the colored ones, are, excuse me, are made by a company called Unique Fingering. So that's UNEEK. And the solid is Harvest Fingering. And I have seen those around in different yarn stores. They're very beautiful yarns, and they're made by Earth Yarns, but it's spelled URTH. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but anyway, that's on the to-do list for the coming year. And I have a mojo for shawls at the moment, so I'm thinking this one might get on my knitting needles pretty soon. So that is my podcast for today. That is the first one. I hope those of you who have stuck with me through it enjoyed it, and I think I'll give it a try another time if this seems to be enjoyed. So if you liked my video, like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully come back maybe in a month or 6 weeks from now with some new things to show you. All right, take care, stay well. Bye-bye.